I will never forgive your mother for giving birth to you.
Wrestling has long been a family business, passing genetic brawn and enthusiasm for a life on the road from one generation to the next. And no family has been as influential or consequential in the world of wrestling as the McMahon family, which has shaped the entire landscape of professional wrestling in its own image for over 4 generations. The McMahons have taken wrestling from the old territorial days of Vince's father and grandfather to the sports entertainment spectacle he and his wife would create to the publicly traded company that his daughter looks set to inherit one day in the future. So how did it all come about? The story began when Jess McMahon descended from the Thomond McMahon clan of Western Ireland and began promoting wrestling shows in 1915. Jess started out as an entrepreneurial sports promoter in New York City, managing and promoting a boxing club in Harlem. He got involved in baseball, founding a few African-American baseball clubs in the area, ran a casino, and then got involved in the still-developing world of pro wrestling. Jess, never one to waste a business opportunity, began promoting wrestling matches in both Long Island and New York City, including at Madison Square Garden. Jess and his son, Vincent J. McMahon, formed the Capital Wrestling Corporation, CWC, in 1952. In 1953, the father and son duo soon teamed with a longtime wrestler turned promoter named Joseph Toots Monk, who had revolutionized both the infrastructure and showmanship of the scripted sport. On November 22, 1954, Jess McMahon passed away of a cerebral hemorrhage. Upon his death, his son Vincent took over the business. Unlike Major League Baseball or the NFL, there was no dominant wrestling league at that time. Instead, the sport had a more diffuse system, with different promotions owning different geographic territories. The CWC extended its reach down to the Mid-Atlantic, where Vince Sr. bought an area in the city and began putting on regular matches. What really caused a stir was Vince Sr.'s successful effort to get 2-hour wrestling extravaganza broadcast on live TV. Other wrestling promoters were wary of the idea. They resented McMahon for pursuing it, believing that putting wrestling on TV for free would kill the incentive for people to see it in person. Vince Sr. obviously did not think this. "If this is the way television kills promoters," he said, "I'm going to die a very rich man." By 1963, the CWC was growing rapidly, creating conflicts with the NWA, leading Vince Sr. to form the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, otherwise known as the WWWF, which operated as its own body to sanction title bouts. More success followed, especially once they launched even bigger TV shows in 1971 and 1972, including WWWF Championship Wrestling. Vince Sr. also married twice, once to Victoria H. Hanner, with whom he fathered 2 children, Vincent Vince McMahon Jr. Due to this and also having to grow up under a series of abusive stepfathers, Vince Jr. developed a rather resentful attitude towards Vince McMahon Sr. Later, the two would reconcile as Jr. needed to learn the trades of the wrestling industry to escape his poor upbringing and start working alongside his old man. In 1982, McMahon Jr. approached his father to buy WWWF, who was already 76 and on the verge of retiring. He accepted his son's offer, but on one condition: he would not cross regions and would stick to the current territorial system. When Vince Jr. took over the family business in a small but consequential way, he rebranded and became the WWF. They were neck and neck with NWA, and a new rival was rising in the shape of the American Wrestling Association. However, Vince Jr. was ready to take them on and began signing up some of the top talents from the other promotions. One of the first big haymakers the new owner threw at his rivals was secretly maneuvering to buy one of the NWA's biggest promotions, Georgia Championship Wrestling. This acquisition gave him access to even more talent, including the future icon Hulk Hogan, and more importantly, weakened a key rival. Vince Jr. continued to buy regional promotions and roll them up into the WWF, earning national exposure. He continued to take risks and try new approaches, matches, appealing to younger fans via a new generation of wrestlers like Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, and The Ultimate Warrior, to name a few. He also began putting shows on MTV and created the first national pay-per-view event with WrestleMania 3, which set the business model for years to come. However, throughout the mid-90s and early noughties, the rivalry between WWF and WCW grew at such a rate that it turned into a personal animosity between WWF owner Vince McMahon and WCW owner Ted Turner. While the WCW was the dominant promotion for much of the mid-90s, various factors came together to turn the tide in the WWF's favor at the end of the decade. These included a radical rebranding of their formerly family-friendly product to a highly sexualized and violent show geared towards older teens and adults. The WCW ultimately ran into financial difficulties due to the amount of money they had promised wrestlers during a hiring binge in the early and middle part of the decade, which had been aimed at acquiring large portions of the WWF talent roster. Despite efforts to salvage the company, it was ultimately sold to McMahon, ending the Monday Night Wars. In retrospect, wrestling commentators have come to see the era of the Monday Night Wars as the golden age of wrestling, with the feud between the two companies bringing out their best quality product in terms of creativity and the performances of their wrestlers. In 2001, when a rebranded WWE purchased the Turner-owned WCW, it became the only real name in wrestling and a global brand. But what about Vince Jr.? What role did he play in all of this? Although the father-son duo shared similar ambitions, one of the significant differences between the two was that the elder believed that ownership should stay out of the spotlight, while the younger McMahon embraced being part of the action. He was a ringside commentator beginning in the early 1970s, and continued in the role after he bought the company. For much of that time, the kayfabe, or fictional storyline, presented other men as the chairmen and owners of the WWF. That ended in 1997, when Vince Jr. plotted to surprise star Bret Hart in a match during a major event in Canada. Vince Jr. hopped into the ring to take responsibility for the wildly unpopular plan dubbed the Montreal Screwjob. At the time, it was a matter of real life bleeding into fiction. He really did surprise and piss off Hart with the match's outcome, and introduced the world to a brand new character, Mr. McMahon. Over the next 24 years, Vince Jr. was frequently part of storylines, playing a nefarious villain and foil to some of the company's most powerful and popular superstars. His rivalry with Stone Cold Steve Austin was the main focal point of the WWE's action for several years in the late 90s and early 2000s, when his children also began to get involved as they reached adulthood. His son Shane saw his father's iconic bouts with Steve Austin and thought he could do even better. Slowly getting himself involved in the thick of it, he went up against the likes of Test, Big Show, and Kurt Angle, and soon enough, Stephanie would follow him into the ring too, even becoming WWF Women's Champion at one point. Stephanie and Shane tried to do their father good by taking prominent roles in the kayfabe storylines, but it saw the brother-sister duo getting banned for their kayfabe involvements with the WCW and ECW respectively. Behind the scenes, however, things were much happier for the McMahons, as by then the family had taken the WWE public, allowing it to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange and be open to investors, a move that would increase its value exponentially in the years to follow. Apart from that, Vince McMahon would also enter the world of football when he formed the XFL, a would-be challenger to the National Football League that was supposed to focus far more on individual characters and fast-paced play. In the end, the XFL did not catch on the way he had hoped for, and would fold after only one season. Vince McMahon retired earlier this year following the federal investigations to report that the 76-year-old paid millions of dollars to cover up sexual misconduct and infidelity claims. Thus, as of now, his daughter Stephanie is the chairwoman and co-CEO of the WWE, while her husband, Paul Levesque, a superstar wrestler going by the name of Triple H, is the chief content officer of the WWE. This is the story of the McMahons, the most powerful and influential family in the wrestling world. We hope you gained some insight into the family from this video, and if you enjoyed it, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.